Have you ever saved someone's life only to discover they're your natural enemy? That's exactly what happened when shepherd girl Aria found a wounded stranger who would turn her quiet mountain life into a war between two worlds. The mist clung to the Thornfield Mountains like a shroud, rolling down through pine forests and across the high meadows where Aria Blackwood had tended her family's sheep for as long as she could remember. At 24, she knew every stone, every stream, every hidden path through the wilderness that surrounded their remote farm. She knew which plants could heal and which could kill, which sounds meant danger and which meant safety. What she didn't know was that her entire world was about to change. The morning started like any other, at her ways before dawn, pulling on her worn leather boots and woolen cloak before stepping out into the crisp mountain air. The sheep were restless in their pen, bleating and pressing against the far corner, as if something had spooked them during the night. "Easy, girls," she murmured, unlatching the gate. "What's got you all worked up?" That's when she saw the blood. Dark stains marked the grass near the pen, leading away toward the tree line. Aria's hand instinctively moved to the silver knife at her belt, a family heirloom passed down through generations of Blackwood shepherds who had learned to protect their flocks from the wolves that roamed these mountains. But as she followed the blood trail, her breath caught in her throat. A man lay crumpled beneath the ancient oak tree at the edge of her property. He was unconscious, naked, and covered in wounds that should have killed any mortal being. Claw marks raked across his chest, bite marks punctured his shoulder, and blood matted his dark hair. Yet he was breathing. Aria approached cautiously, her silver knife drawn. The stranger was tall and powerfully built, with broad shoulders and muscles that spoke of a warrior's training. His face, even in unconsciousness, held a strength that made her pulse quicken. Dark hair fell across sharp cheekbones, and his skin held a warmth that seemed impossible, given the blood loss. She should have left him, should have returned to the house and sent word to the village constable, should have remembered every story her grandmother had told about the dangers that lurked in the deep forest. Instead, she knelt beside him and pressed her fingers to his throat, feeling for a pulse. His eyes snapped open. They were the color of amber honey, flecked with gold, and utterly inhuman. For a moment, they held no recognition, no humanity, only the wild intelligence of a predator sizing up potential prey. Then awareness flooded back into them, and the stranger's gaze focused on her face. "Don't," he rasped, his voice rough as gravel. "Don't touch me, it's not safe." But Aria had already made her choice. "You're hurt, you need help. You don't understand what I am. I understand that you're bleeding to death on my land." She slipped her arms under his shoulders, surprised by how warm his skin felt, despite his injuries. "Can you walk? You should run," he whispered, but he didn't resist as she helped him to his feet. "Before they come looking for me." "Who?" His amber eyes met hers, and she saw something there that made her heart race. Not fear, but recognition, as if he knew her, though they had never met. "My pack," he said simply. But what Aria didn't know was that her family's secret would change everything. Aria's cottage was small but well-appointed, the kind of home built by generations of practical mountain folk who knew how to survive in harsh conditions. She helped the stranger to her grandmother's old room, settling him on the narrow bed with an efficiency born of years tending injured animals. "What's your name?" she asked as she gathered clean cloths and her grandmother's healing supplies. "Damon," he replied after a moment's hesitation. Damon Greystone. The name meant nothing to her, but something in the way he said it suggested it should. "Well, Damon Greystone, you're lucky I found you when I did. These wounds," she trailed off as she began cleaning the blood from his chest. The claw marks she had seen in the dim dawn light were already beginning to close, the edges of torn flesh knitting together with impossible speed. "You heal fast," she observed, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Too fast for a human," he agreed, watching her reaction carefully. "You're not screaming? Most people would be screaming by now." "I'm not most people." Aria continued her work, applying salve to the wounds that were still open. "My grandmother always said the mountains held more than just sheep and wolves. I learned early not to question everything I saw. Your grandmother was wise. She was also very specific about silver. Aria's hand moved to the knife at her belt, though she didn't draw it, said it was the only thing that could stop certain kinds of monsters. Damon's smile held no humor. And what do you think I am, Aria Blackwood? The fact that he knew her name should have alarmed her. Instead, it sent a strange thrill through her chest. I think you're something that shouldn't exist, and I think you're in trouble, the kind of trouble that could get you killed for helping me. Then why haven't you warned me away harder? He was quiet for a long moment, his amber eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Because, he said finally, I've been looking for you for a very long time. Before Aria could ask what he meant, the sound of howling echoed across the mountains. Not the normal call of wild wolves, but something deeper, more complex. A communication that carried meaning she couldn't understand, but somehow felt in her bone. Damon tensed, his muscles coiling, as if preparing to spring from the bed. They've found my trail. Huh? The silver moon back. My enemies. His eyes never left the window, tracking sounds too subtle for human ears. They're the ones who did this to me. Why? Because I wouldn't let them expand their territory into human lands. Because I've spent the last 5 years protecting settlements like yours from their raids. He turned to look at her, and the weight of his gaze was almost physical. Because I chose to be something more than a monster. The alpha's wounds were healing too fast to be natural. The howling came again, closer now. Aria could hear her sheep bleating in distress, could smell something wild and dangerous on the wind. How many are there? She asked, moving to the window to peer out through the curtains. 6, maybe 7, enough to overwhelm even a healthy alpha. And you're not healthy? No, but I won't let them hurt you for helping me. Aria made a decision that would have horrified her grandmother. She moved to the old chest beside the bed and withdrew a bundle wrapped in oiled cloth. Inside was a crossbow her great-grandfather had crafted, along with bolts tipped in silver. You're not fighting them alone, she said, loading the weapon with practiced ease. Aria, you don't understand. These aren't normal wolves. They're werewolves. I know. She met his shocked gaze calmly. I told you my grandmother was specific about silver. She was also specific about what kinds of creatures require it. How long have you known? About werewolves in general? Most of my life. About you specifically? She considered this. Since you healed 3 days' worth of wounds in 3 hours. Damon stared at her for a long moment, then threw back his head and laughed, a rich, warm sound that seemed to chase the shadows from the small room. Most humans would have tried to kill me by now. Most humans didn't grow up hearing stories about the old pacts, about the time when wolves and shepherds worked together instead of hunting each other. His laughter died. You know about the pacts? My grandmother said our family was part of them. Once, before something went wrong, and the alliance broke. Aria hefted the crossbow, testing its weight. She said someday the wolves would return to claim what was theirs. And what did they come to claim? Before she could answer, the cottage door exploded inward. The werewolves that poured through Aria's shattered door were massive, even in their human forms. They moved with the coordinated precision of a military unit, spreading out to cover all exits, while their leader, a scarred man with silver-streaked hair and eyes like winter ice, stepped forward. Magnus Silvermoon, Damon growled, pushing himself upright despite his injuries. Still breaking into homes uninvited. I see. Still protecting humans who would kill you without a second thought, Magnus replied, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. Though I admit, this one is interesting. His pale gaze fixed on Aria, who stood with her crossbow trained on his chest. Put down the weapon, girl. We have no quarrel with you. You broke down my door. That makes it my quarrel. Magnus's smile was all teeth. Spirited, I can see why Damon is drawn to you, but you're playing a game you don't understand. I understand, and you're trespassing on my land and threatening my guest. Your guest? Magnus laughed, the sound like breaking glass. Do you know what your guest really is? What he's done? I know he's the alpha of the Ironwood pack, Aria replied steadily. I know you attacked him while he was alone and outnumbered, and I know you're afraid of him, or you wouldn't have brought so many fighters. The other werewolves stared at her words, their human faces showing flickers of the beasts beneath. But Magnus held up a hand, his attention fully focused on Aria now. You speak of pacts as if you know them. Tell me, girl, what do you know of your own bloodline? Damon tensed. Magnus, don't. What bloodline? Aria kept her weapon steady, but something cold was forming in her stomach. The Blackwood line, Magnus continued, ignoring Damon's warning growl. One of the oldest shepherd families in these mountains. Your grandmother never told you the whole truth, did she? What truth? That the Blackwoods weren't just allied with the wolves, they were wolves. Every generation produced at least one child who could shift, who could bridge the gap between human and beast. Magnus's smile was predatory. Your grandmother was one. Her grandmother before her. The gift skips some generations, lies dormant in others, but it always returns. Aria's hands started to shake. That's impossible. Is it? Haven't you always felt it different? Known things you shouldn't know? Sensed dangers before they appeared? Magnus took a step closer. Haven't you wondered why wild animals are never afraid of you? Why you can calm a panicked horse with a touch? And then she discovered the truth about the rival pack's leader. She's lying, Damon said, but his voice lacked conviction. The Blackwood line died out 3 generations ago. The shifting line died out, Magnus corrected. But the blood remained, diluted, dormant, but present. Until now, his eyes never left Aria's face. Look at yourself, girl. Really look. Tell me you can't feel it stirring. Aria wanted to deny it, wanted to dismiss his words as the ravings of a madman. But as she stood there, with her crossbow trained on a werewolf, she couldn't ignore the strange warmth spreading through her chest, the way her senses seemed suddenly sharper, more focused. Even if that were true, she said carefully, it doesn't change anything. You're still trespassing, but it changes everything, Magnus replied, because a Blackwood shifter would be powerful beyond imagining. The bloodline, that once brokered peace between species, wielded with the strength of a born predator. He gestured toward Damon. Our wounded alpha knows this. It's why he came here, why he's been searching for you. Aria's gaze snapped to Damon, who had the grace to look uncomfortable. Is that true? Damon met her eyes steadily. I felt the pull of your bloodline. Yes, but that's not why I... He stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. It's complicated. Uncomplicated. The old pack spoke of a time when the bloodlines would reunite, when a Blackwood and an alpha would bond to restore the balance between human and wolf. Damon's voice was quiet but firm. I've been searching for you because my pack needs that alliance. The Silver Moons have been growing bolder, pushing into human territory, disrupting the careful peace we've maintained. You've been using me. I've been trying to save both our peoples. Magnus laughed. How noble. But he's not telling you the whole truth, is he? About what the bonding would require. Aria kept her crossbow trained on Magnus, but directed her question to Damon. What bonding? Damon's jaw tightened. A permanent mate bond. It would awaken your shifting abilities, while strengthening my alpha power. Together, we could force the Silver Moons back to their original territory. A mate bond. Aria's voice was dangerously quiet. You mean marriage? More than marriage. A melding of souls, of essences. You would become part wolf, I would become part human. Neither of us would ever be alone again. The cottage fell silent, except for the distant bleating of frightened sheep. Aria processed this information, her mind racing through implications and possibilities. And if I refuse? Then the Silver Moons will continue their expansion, Magnus said cheerfully. They'll overrun every human settlement, from here to the coast, starting with yours. But first, one of Magnus's lieutenants added, will eliminate the threat Damon represents. The werewolf moved faster than human eyes could follow, lunging for Damon's throat with claws extended. Aria's crossbow bolt took him in the chest before he'd covered half the distance. the silver tip dropping him instantly. "Anyone else want to test my aim?" she asked conversationally. But someone was watching from the forest. The death of Magnus's lieutenant changed the atmosphere in the cottage from tense negotiation to barely contained violence. The remaining silver moon wolves began to spread out, their human forms starting to blur and shift as they prepared for a fight. "Enough," Magnus snarled, his own form beginning to elongate. If the girl wants to play protector, she can learn what that costs. Aria had never seen a werewolf transformation before. The stories her grandmother had told painted it as a thing of beauty, a gift from ancient spirits who understood that humanity needed claws and fangs to survive in a world full of monsters. The reality was terrifying. Magnus's bones cracked and reformed, his spine extending as his skull pushed forward into a muzzle full of teeth designed for tearing flesh. His hands became claws, his muscles swelled with supernatural strength, and his eyes blazed with an intelligence that was more than animal, but less than human. In seconds, a 7-foot werewolf stood where the man had been. The others followed suit, until Aria's small cottage was filled with creatures that belonged in nightmares rather than reality. Only Damon remained human, his injuries preventing him from making the change safely. "Last chance, girl." Magnus's voice was a growling approximation of human speech. "Give us the alpha, and we'll make your death quick." Aria looked at Damon, who was struggling to stand despite his wounds. She thought about her grandmother's stories, about the old pacts and the price of peace. She thought about the strange warmth that had been growing in her chest since the moment she touched Damon's skin. Then she made her choice. No. The word came out with more force than she'd intended, carrying harmonics that made the werewolves step back in surprise. The cottage windows rattled in their frames, and somewhere deep in her bones, Aria felt something ancient and powerful stirring to life. "Aria," Damon whispered, awe and concern warring in his voice.
"What are you doing?"
"What I should have done years ago." She dropped the crossbow and closed her eyes, reaching for the warmth in her chest. What my bloodline was born to do. The transformation began differently than it had for the others. Where theirs had been violent and sudden, Aria's was smooth as water, flowing downhill. Her human form didn't break and reform, it simply became something more. Her senses exploded outward, picking up scents and sounds she'd never noticed. She could smell the fear on Magnus's pack, could hear Damon's heart racing with something that might have been hope or terror. Her muscles filled with strength that had nothing to do with size, and everything to do with the predator awakening within her. When she opened her eyes, they were no longer brown, but golden amber, flecked with the same honey-colored light that shone in Damon's gaze. "Impossible," Magnus breathed. "The Blackwood line produces only human form shifters, enhanced humans, not true wolves." "My grandmother told me the first Blackwood was special," Aria said, her voice carrying new harmonics of power. "She was born from the union of a human woman and the wolf spirit of the mountain itself. Her children could take any form they needed." To prove her point, Aria let the change continue. Her human form flowed into something between woman and wolf, taller than she had been, with claws that could rend steel and senses that could track a whisper across miles of wilderness. But unlike the others, she retained her human intelligence, her capacity for strategy and planning. She was what the old stories called a dire wolf, a shifter of the first bloodline before the gift had been diluted by generations of human breeding. What happened next would reveal why the wolves had really come. "Now I understand," she said, looking directly at Magnus. "You didn't come here to kill Damon. You came here to prevent the awakening of my bloodline." Magnus's werewolf form was impressive, but in the face of a true dire wolf, he suddenly looked small and uncertain. "The Silver Moon Pack seeks only to reclaim territory that was stolen from us." "Layer," Aria took a step forward, and several of his packmates backed away. "You seek to break the old pacts permanently, to make war between human and wolf inevitable. A Blackwood Alpha alliance would ruin those plans. You know nothing about our grievances." "I know you killed my grandmother." The words fell into sudden silence. Even Damon stared at her in shock. Elena Blackwood didn't die of fever, Aria continued, her voice deadly calm. She died because someone poisoned the well she drank from every morning. Someone who knew her habits, who had been watching her golden eyes fixed on Magnus. Someone who couldn't risk her teaching me the old ways. Magnus's silence was answer enough. You murdered an old woman to prevent her from awakening my bloodline. But you were too late, weren't you? She'd already told me the stories, already prepared me for what I might become. Aria smiled, and it was a terrible thing to see. She knew you were coming. The Blackwood line was always too clever for their own good, and the Silver Moon line was always too ambitious for theirs. The battle that followed was brief and decisive. Magnus's pack had expected to face a wounded alpha and a defenseless human. Instead, they found themselves fighting a dire wolf whose power had been building for 24 years, and an alpha whose protective instincts had been triggered by the threat to his potential mate. When the smoke cleared, only Magnus remained alive, held down by Aria's claws, while Damon stood guard with her silver-tipped crossbow. You have a choice, Aria told the defeated werewolf. You can return to your territory and respect the old boundaries, or you can join your packmates. And if I refuse both options, then I hunt down every member of your extended pack and show them what happens to those who threaten my family. The dire wolf's smile was all teeth. Did you think I didn't inherit my grandmother's memory? I know where you sleep, Magnus Silvermoon. I know where your cubs play. Magnus's submission was complete and immediate, the deep, instinctive surrender of a lesser predator to a greater one. The Silver Moon pack withdraws, he said formally. We will respect the old boundaries. See that you do. When Magnus had slunk away into the forest, Aria allowed her dire wolf form to fade back to human. The transformation left her breathless and exhilarated, her skin tingling with residual power. So, she said, turning to face Damon, about this mate bond. Damon looked at her with wonder and something deeper, a recognition that went beyond the physical into realms of soul and spirit that most beings never accessed. You're magnificent, he said quietly. I felt your power when it awakened, felt the call of your dire wolf to my alpha nature. The bond is already beginning to form. Aria could feel it too, a golden thread of connection that seemed to link her heart to his, carrying emotions and sensations that weren't entirely her own. His pain had become her pain, his strength, her strength. Is this what you came here for? She asked. A political alliance disguised as a mating bond?
That's what I told myself, Damon admitted.
The practical reasons, the necessity for our peoples.
But the truth?
He moved closer, his amber eyes holding hers.
The truth is that I've been dreaming of you for years.
Dreams of golden eyes and fierce courage, of a woman who could stand beside an alpha as an equal. Dreams or visions, both perhaps. The alpha bloodline carries its own magic, its own connection to the old powers. He reached out tentatively, and when she didn't pull away, he cupped her face in his hands. I knew you before I met you, Aria Blackwood, and I loved you before I understood what that meant. The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten. And the maid bond, what would it really mean? Partnership in everything. Hunting, fighting, leading, loving. Your dire wolf nature would complement my alpha power, making us stronger together than either could be alone. His thumbs traced her cheekbones gently. But it's not just political, Aria. A true mate bond is forever. If you accept it, you'll never be able to love anyone else. Neither will I, and if I don't accept it. Pain flickered across his features. Then, I respect your choice and find another way to protect both our peoples. The bond can't be forced. It requires willing hearts from both parties. Aria closed her eyes, feeling the golden thread that connected them pulse with warmth and possibility. Part of her wanted to accept immediately, to dive headfirst into this connection that felt more real than anything she'd ever experienced. But part of her remembered her grandmother's warnings about choices made in haste. I need time, she said finally. This is all happening very fast. Of course, Damon stepped back, though she could see the effort it cost him. The pack can wait. No, Aria caught his hand before he could withdraw completely. The pack can't wait. I felt your memories through the bond, seen what the silver moons are capable of. How long before they regroup? Days, maybe a week, if we're lucky. Then we don't have time for a long courtship. Aria smiled, the expression both nervous and determined. But we do have time for honesty. Tell me about your pack, Damon. Tell me what I'd be signing up for. The real danger was just beginning. Over the next few hours, as Aria tended to the last of Damon's wounds, and they worked together to repair her shattered door, he told her about the Ironwood Pack, 23 werewolves, ranging in age from newborn cubs to ancient elders, scattered across the mountain territory in small family groups that came together for ceremonies and times of crisis. We're not like Magnus's pack, he explained, as they fitted new hinges to the doorframe. The Silver Moons believe in dominance through fear, expansion through conquest. They see humans as prey or obstacles. And the Ironwood Pack?
We believe in balance. Some of our members have human mates, human children who may or may not carry the shifting gene. We trade with human settlements, provide protection from other supernatural threats. He paused in his work to look at her. We remember the old packs, when cooperation served everyone's interests.
But you're still predators. Yes, we hunt, we fight when necessary, we defend our territory, but we also farm, build, create art and music, and poetry. We're not just beasts wearing human faces. His amber eyes held hers. The alpha's role is to maintain that balance, to keep the pack human enough to coexist with your people, while wolf enough to survive in a dangerous world. It sounds lonely. Damon's hand stilled on the door. It is. An alpha can't show weakness, can't admit fear or uncertainty. The pack depends on my strength, my decisions. One moment of doubt could cost lives, but with a mate bond, I'd have someone who could share that burden, someone whose strength could shore up my weaknesses, whose wisdom could guide my decisions. He set down his tools and turned to face her fully. The bond isn't just about power, Aria. It's about having someone who understands the weight of leadership, who can stand beside you when the choices become impossible. Aria absorbed this, thinking about her grandmother's stories of the first Blackwood shifters who had served as advisors and mediators to werewolf alphas. What happened to the other Blackwood shifters? The ones who bonded with alphas in the past? Damon was quiet for a long moment. Some lived long, happy lives and founded dynasties that lasted centuries. Others, he sighed, others paid the price that comes with standing against forces larger than themselves. The bond provides incredible power, but it also makes you a target for anyone who sees cooperation between species as a threat, like Magnus. Magnus is small-minded, focused on short-term gains. There are older threats, ancient powers that feed on conflict and chaos. They've been working for generations to ensure that humans and supernatural beings remain enemies. Before Aria could ask what he meant, a new sound reached their enhanced hearing, the rapid approach of multiple riders, moving at supernatural speed through the forest. Your pack? She asked, reaching instinctively for her crossbow. Damon tilted his head, listening to sounds beyond human perception. Yes, but they're not alone. Someone else is with them. Someone, his expression grew troubled. Someone whose scent carries power older than anything I've encountered before. And in that moment, Aria realized she wasn't just human anymore. The riders who emerged from the forest moved with fluid grace that spoke of supernatural speed and coordination. Aria counted 12 werewolves in human form, led by a woman whose silver hair and amber eyes marked her as Damon's beater. But it was the 13th figure that commanded attention. She rode a horse that seemed to be made of living shadow, its eyes glowing with intelligence that belonged to no earthly creature. The rider herself appeared to be in her 40s, with dark hair streaked with premature white and features that suggested multiple ethnic backgrounds blended into something entirely unique. Power radiated from her like heat from a forge, ancient, complex, and utterly alien. Damon, the beta called, as the group approached the cottage. We felt your distress through the pack bond. Are you injured? Elena, meet Aria Blackwood, Damon replied, gesturing toward Aria. She's the one who saved my life. Aria, this is Elena Frost, my beta and oldest friend. Elena's amber eyes widened as they fixed on Aria. Blackwood. I thought that line had died out. So did everyone else, Aria replied dryly. Apparently my family has a talent for survival. The mysterious rider dismounted with fluid grace, her shadow horse dissolving into mist. The moment her feet touched the ground, up close, her ageless features held a beauty that belonged to no single human ethnicity, as if she were a blending of every people who had ever walked the earth. Lady Moira, Damon said, offering a respectful bow, I didn't expect to see you here. The awakening of a direwolf is not something that happens quietly, Moira replied, her voice carrying accents from a dozen different cultures, especially not when it occurs at the same time as a renewed silver moon aggression. Her gaze settled on Aria with interest that felt both flattering and uncomfortable. So, the last daughter of the first bloodline finally comes into her power. Your grandmother would be proud. You knew my grandmother? I knew the first Blackwood child. I was there when she made the original pacts with the mountain wolves. Moira's smile held ancient sadness. I've been waiting a very long time for her bloodline to produce another true direwolf. Elena stepped forward, her warrior instincts clearly on edge. My lady, with respect, what brings you to our territory? The Fae codes rarely involve themselves in werewolf politics. These are not ordinary werewolf politics, Moira replied. The silver moon aggression is part of something larger, a coordinated effort to break down the barriers between the supernatural world and human society. Aria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. What kind of coordinated effort? There are beings older than werewolves, older than humans, older even than most of the Fae courts. They've spent millennia in exile, banished to the spaces between worlds by the very pacts your ancestors helped establish. Moira gestured toward the cottage, clearly requesting invitation inside. They're trying to return. The cottage, already small, felt cramped with so many supernatural beings inside it. Moira settled into Aria's grandmother's chair as if she belonged there, while Elena and several pack members positioned themselves strategically around the room. Tell us about these beings, Damon said, his alpha authority evident in his tone. The void touched, Moira replied. Entities that exist in the spaces between life and death, order and chaos, reality and nightmare. They feed on conflict, on the breakdown of natural boundaries. When humans and supernatural beings live in harmony, the barriers holding them in exile grow stronger. When those groups war against each other, the barriers weaken. Aria finished, understanding flooding through her. That's why Magnus has been pushing into human territory. He's not just expanding, he's following orders. The Silver Moon Alpha is too small-minded to understand who he truly serves. Moira agreed, but his actions serve their purpose nonetheless. Every human killed by werewolves, every werewolf hunted by humans, weakens the old protections. And the mate bond between Aria and me would restore the strongest protection of all, the alliance between Dire Wolf and Alpha that originally helped imprison the Void touched. Moira's ancient eyes moved between them. But only if it's freely chosen, freely given. Forced bonds carry no power against beings of that magnitude. Aria felt the weight of cosmic responsibilities settling on her shoulders. So my choice affects more than just our two species. Your choice affects the stability of reality itself. The cottage fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. Finally, Elena spoke up. What happens if Aria chooses not to bond with Damon? Then we find another way, Moira replied simply. The direwolf bloodline is powerful in its own right, even without an alpha bond. But it would take longer to establish the protections we need, and time is not something we have in abundance. How long? Damon asked. Days, perhaps weeks. The void touched are already beginning to test the barriers. Strange things are happening in the deep woods, trees aging decades in hours, streams flowing uphill, shadows moving independently of the objects that cast them. As if summoned by her words, a scream echoed across the mountains, high, inhuman, and filled with a terror that made every supernatural being in the cottage freeze. "Too late," Moira whispered. "They're already here?" The scream came again, closer this time, carrying harmonics that made Aria's newly awakened direwolf instincts roar warnings in her mind. Through the cottage windows, she could see the forest changing, trees writhing as if in pain, the leaves turning black and falling like snow, even though it was only late summer. "Everyone out," Damon commanded, his alpha authority snapping through the room. "Helena, get the pack into defensive positions. Moira, I'll establish wards around the cottage," the Fey woman interrupted, already beginning to weave patterns in the air that left trails of silver light. "The building will serve as a fallback position if we need shelter." "And me?" Aria asked, checking her crossbow and the silver-tipped bolts in her quiver. "You stay close to me," Damon replied firmly. "Your dire wolf abilities are powerful, but you've only just awakened. You don't know your own limits yet." They moved outside as a unit, the Ironwood pack flowing into formation with the precision of soldiers who had fought together for years. Aria found herself impressed by their coordination. Each werewolf knew their role without needing orders, creating overlapping fields of protection and attack. The forest around them was wrong in ways that hurt to perceive directly. Reality seemed to stutter and shift, showing glimpses of other places, other times. In one moment, Aria saw the forest as it was, familiar pine and oak, granite outcroppings, clear streams. In the next, she glimpsed something else entirely, a landscape of twisted metal and burning ice, where the sky bled colors that had no names. "Don't look directly at the distortions," Moira warned, her voice carrying over the rising wind. "The void touched exist, partially outside normal reality. Staring at them too long can trap your consciousness between worlds." A shape moved through the trees, not walking, but flowing like liquid shadow, made solid. Where it passed, the very air seemed to corrode, leaving behind patches of absolute nothingness that hurt to perceive. "Crossbow won't work," Elena called out, her own weapon already shifted to claws and fangs. Physical attacks passed right through them. "What about silver?" Aria asked, still clutching her crossbow despite its apparent uselessness. "Silver disrupts supernatural energy," Damon replied, moving to place himself between her and the approaching entity. "But the void touched aren't supernatural in any way we understand. There's something else entirely." The thing that had been flowing through the trees suddenly accelerated, moving faster than thought toward the cottage. Moira raised her hands, silver light blazing from her fingers, as she wove protective barriers in the air. The void entity struck her wards and recoiled with a sound like reality tearing. For a moment, it was visible as more than just absence, a writhing mass of hunger and malevolence that existed in too many dimensions for human perception to fully process. "The wards will hold for now," Moira gasped, her face pale from the effort. "But not indefinitely. These things feed on magical energy. The more power we use against them, the stronger they become." "Then how do we fight them?" Elena demanded. "We don't fight them," Aria said suddenly, understanding flooding through her dire wolf instincts. "We banish them. The original pacts didn't destroy the void torched. They sent them away. The binding ritual," Damon breathed. "But that requires a willing sacrifice of power," Moira finished. "Someone has to anchor the banishment by giving up their supernatural abilities permanently." The cottage shook as another void entity struck the wards. Through the windows, Aria could see more shapes moving in the distorted forest. Dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, all converging on this single point where reality had been weakened by conflict. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "No," Damon's response was immediate and absolute. "You just came into your power. I won't let you sacrifice it." "For what? For saving the world?" Aria turned to face him, her golden eyes blazing with determination. "This is exactly what the dire wolf bloodline was created for, Damon. To make the hard choices when the stakes are impossibly high." "There has to be another way," There is, Moira said softly, the mate bond. All eyes turned to the ancient Fae woman. Two powers, freely joined, create something greater than the sum of their parts, she explained. A dire wolf bonded to an alpha would have enough strength to perform the banishment without either party losing their abilities permanently. But the bond has to be real, Elena added, understanding the implications. It can't be a political arrangement or a desperate expedient. The magic can sense the difference. Aria looked at Damon, seeing in his amber eyes the same mixture of hope and terror that she felt in her own heart. So, she said quietly, it comes down to this. Do we love each other enough to save the world? The void entities pressed closer against Moira's failing wards. As Aria and Damon faced each other in the cottage's main room, the Ironwood pack had formed a protective circle around them, while Moira channeled every ounce of her ancient power into maintaining the barriers that kept reality stable within the cottage walls. A mate bond cannot be rushed, Elena warned, her eyes never leaving the windows where shadows writhed and shifted. The ritual requires complete honesty, absolute trust. Any deception or reservation will cause it to fail. Then we'd better be honest, Aria said, taking Damon's hands in hers. I need to know when you first came looking for me. Was it only about the alliance? Damon's grip tightened on her fingers. I told myself it was. The practical benefits, the political necessity. But the dreams started years ago. Aria, dreams of golden eyes and fierce courage, of a woman who could stand beside an alpha as an equal. I was drawn to you long before I understood why. And now I know that everything else, the alliance, the power, the protection it would bring, all of that is secondary to the simple fact that I love you, not for what you can do for my pack, but for who you are when no one else is watching. The honesty in his voice made her chest tighten. I love you too. I fought against it, told myself it was too fast, too convenient. But when Magnus threatened you, when I saw your blood on the ground, she shook her head. I would have torn apart reality itself to keep you safe. Is that enough? Damon asked, looking toward Moira. Will the bond accept feelings, this new, this uncertain? Love isn't about duration, the Fae woman replied, sweat beading on her forehead as the wards came under renewed assault. It's about depth, about the willingness to choose the other person's welfare over your own survival. What you feel for each other is real, whether it's days old or decades old. Another crash against the barriers, stronger this time. Through the cottage walls, Aria could hear reality beginning to fray at the edges. Sounds that belonged to no earthly creature, lights that hurt to perceive, temperatures that shifted from Arctic cold to desert heat without warning. How do we begin? She asked. With truth, Moira replied. Look into each other's eyes and speak aloud the deepest fear in your heart. The bond must be founded on absolute vulnerability. Aria met Damon's gaze, seeing in his amber eyes the weight of centuries and the loneliness that had shaped him into the man he'd become. I'm afraid, she said quietly, that I'm not strong enough to be what you need, that my bloodline is just a pretty story, and when the real test comes, I'll fail everyone who depends on me. I'm afraid, Damon replied, that loving you will make me weak, that caring more about your safety than my pack's will cost lives I was sworn to protect. The air between them began to shimmer with golden light, as their honesty created the foundation for something deeper. Now speak your deepest desire, Moira instructed, her voice strained with effort. I want to build something lasting with you, Aria said, the words flowing from some deep well of certainty she hadn't known existed. Not just an alliance or a political arrangement, but a partnership that makes both of us stronger. I want to face whatever comes next, knowing that I'm not alone. I want to give you everything, Damon replied, his voice rough with emotion. My protection, my loyalty, my heart, my soul. I want to be worthy of the gift you're offering, worthy of standing beside the last dire wolf. The golden light between them intensified, forming threads that seemed to weave their very essences together. Aria could feel Damon's emotions as if they were her own. His fierce protectiveness, his deep-seated fear of failure, his growing wonder at the connection forming between them. And now, Moira said, the vow that will seal the bond permanently. Aria and Damon spoke the words together, as if they had always known them. By moon and star, by earth and sky, by the ancient powers that flow through our blood, I choose you, in strength and weakness, in joy and sorrow, in this life and whatever comes after. We are mated, bonded, made one by our own free will. The golden light exploded outward, washing through the cottage and beyond, striking the void entities with force that sent them reeling back into the spaces between worlds. Where the light touched the distorted forest, reality reasserted itself. Trees resumed their proper forms. Streams flowed downhill again. Shadows returned to their proper relationship with the objects that cast them. Aria gasped as the bond settled into place, creating a permanent connection that let her feel Damon's heartbeat as if it were her own. His strength flowed into her, while her dire wolf intuition merged with his alpha instincts to create something entirely new. It's done, Moira breathed, her wards finally stable as the void entities retreated to lick their wounds. The bonding is complete. And the banishment? Elena asked. Will require one more step, Aria said, understanding flooding through her enhanced awareness. We have to go to the source, the place where the barriers between worlds are thinnest. The old ritual ground, Damon realized, where the first pacts were made. Moira nodded grimly. The void touched will make their final attempt there, trying to tear apart the original protections. You'll have to face them on ground where their power is strongest. Together, Aria said, her hand finding Damon's. We face them together. The old ritual ground lay deep in the heart of the mountains, where standing stones older than human memory formed a circle around a natural clearing. Aria had heard stories of this place from her grandmother, where the first Blackwood had met the mountain spirits, where the original pacts between human and wolf had been sworn under starlight. Now it was a wound in reality itself. The void, touched, had gathered here in force, their presence turning the ancient clearing into a nightmare landscape, where the laws of physics held no meaning. Up was down, hot was cold, and the very air seemed to writhe with malevolent intelligence. Stay close, Damon murmured as they approached the edge of the distortion. The bond will anchor us to each other, but this place will try to separate us in every way possible. Aria nodded, feeling through their connection, the steady pulse of his heartbeat, the warm strength of his alpha power flowing into her dire wolf nature. Together, they were something unprecedented, a fusion of the oldest bloodlines, the deepest magics. They would need every advantage they could get. The Ironwood Pack had taken positions around the ritual grounds perimeter, ready to prevent any void entities from escaping to terrorize the surrounding countryside. Moira stood with them, weaving protective barriers that would contain the conflict to this single location. Remember, the fair woman called out, the banishment requires a willing sacrifice of power. You must pour your combined strength into the ritual, even knowing it might cost you everything. Will we survive it? Aria asked. I don't know, Moira replied honestly. No bonded pair has ever attempted this kind of working. You're writing the rules as you go. Aria and Damon exchanged a look of perfect understanding. They had found each other against impossible odds, had forged a connection that bridged the gap between species. If this was to be their only adventure together, at least it would be one worth remembering. Hand in hand, they stepped into the distorted clearing. Reality writhed around them immediately, trying to convince their senses that they were falling upward, breathing water, walking through walls of solid light. But the mate bond held them steady, their combined will creating a bubble of stability in the chaos. At the center of the clearing, where the ancient altar stone had once stood, a massive rift had opened in the fabric of reality. Through it, Aria could see the realm of the void touched, a place of absolute hunger where nothing could exist for long without being devoured. The original binding point, Damon realized. They're trying to reverse the first banishment. Then we rebuild it, Aria said, drawing on power she was only beginning to understand. Stronger, this time. Permanent. They began to weave their combined magic into the pattern of the ancient ritual, calling on bloodlines that reached back to the dawn of human and wolf cooperation. Aria felt her direwolf nature rise to meet Damon's alpha strength, the two powers merging into something that belonged entirely to neither species, but somehow contained the best of both. The void touched, responded immediately, pouring out of their dimensional rift in numbers that defied counting. They struck at the bonded pair with everything they had, attacks that targeted the mind, the soul, the very foundations of identity and existence. But Aria and Damon held fast to each other and to their purpose. The mate bond made them unshakable, their love for each other, providing an anchor that the void entities could not corrupt or destroy. Now, Aria whispered, as the ritual reached its climax, give them everything. Together they poured their combined power into the ancient binding patterns, strengthening them with centuries of accumulated magic and the unprecedented fusion of direwolf and alpha natures. The rift began to close, reality reasserting itself around the healing wound. The void touched, screamed their rage and hunger as they were pulled back into exile, their forms dissolving into nothingness as the barriers between worlds snapped back into place. When the light faded and the clearing returned to normal, Aria and Damon stood alone among the ancient stones, both of them somehow still alive, still bonded, still possessed of their supernatural abilities. It worked, Damon said, wonder in his voice. It worked, Aria agreed, then collapsed as exhaustion finally overtook her. 3 months after the bonding, being Luna of the Ironwood Pack proved more challenging than Aria had anticipated. The magical bond with Damon provided her with enhanced strength and supernatural senses, but it also connected her to every member of the pack in ways that could be overwhelming. She felt their joys as her own, the pride of young wolves mastering their first transformation, the contentment of mated pairs, the simple pleasure of a successful hunt. But she also felt their pain, their fears, their doubts about accepting a human-born Luna who had only recently discovered her direwolf heritage. Luna, Aria, came a voice from the cottage doorway. May I speak with you? Aria looked up from the medicinal herbs she was sorting to see Thomas Ironwood, one of the pack's elders. His weathered face held the kind of skepticism that came from decades of experience and the instinctive wariness of change. Of course, Thomas. Please, sit. The older werewolf settled into the chair across from her, his movements careful and deliberate. It's about the younglings. Some of the parents are concerned about the direction of their training. What kind of concerns? You've been teaching them to work with humans, to seek cooperation instead of dominance. It's not the traditional way. Thomas's voice held the weight of generations. Some worry that we're making them soft, vulnerable to packs that still follow the old methods. Aria set down her herbs and gave Thomas her full attention. This was exactly the kind of challenge she'd known would come. The tension between evolution and tradition, between her vision of what the pack could become and their need to survive in a dangerous world. Tell me about the traditional way, she said carefully. Strength through separation, wolves with wolves, humans with humans. When our kinds interact, one must dominate and the other submit. It served us well for centuries. Has it? Because, from what I understand, pack territories have been shrinking for generations. Young wolves leave for the cities and never return. The old ways are dying, whether we acknowledge it or not. Thomas's amber eyes flashed with something that might have been anger or grief. You've been Luna for 3 months. I've been wolf for 70 years. Perhaps you should listen to those with more experience. Perhaps you should consider that experience without adaptation leads to extinction. The words came out sharper than Aria had intended, and she felt Thomas's hurt through the pack bond before his expression showed it. This was the delicate balance she struggled with daily, asserting her authority as Luna, while respecting the wisdom of wolves who had lived far longer than her 24 years. I'm sorry, she said more gently. That was unnecessary, harsh. You're right that I have much to learn about pack dynamics. But Thomas, I've also seen what happens when supernatural beings refuse to evolve. The void touched nearly destroyed reality itself because they couldn't accept change. The younglings need to be able to defend themselves. They do, but they also need to be able to build bridges, to find solutions that don't require violence. The world is changing. Whether we like it or not, we can change with it, or we can be left behind. Before Thomas could respond, the cottage door burst open, and Elena rushed in, her face tight with concern. Luna, we have a problem, a big one. Aria rose immediately, her dire wolf instincts picking up on the beater's distress. What is it? Hunters, a full team, armed with silver weapons and tracking gear. They're moving through the territory systematically, setting traps designed specifically for werewolves. How many? 8 that we've confirmed, possibly more. They know what they're doing. Military precision, supernatural awareness. This isn't a group of local farmers with pitchforks. Thomas stood as well, his earlier skepticism temporarily set aside in the face of immediate danger. Professional hunters. We haven't seen their kind in these mountains for 20 years. What changed? Aria asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. You did? Elena replied grimly. The awakening of a dire wolf, the mate bond with an alpha, that the defeat of the void touched. It sent ripples through the supernatural community. Some see it as a sign of hope, others see it as a threat that needs to be eliminated. Through the pack bond, Aria felt Damon's alarm as he received the same information from other scouts. He was already moving toward the cottage, his alpha instincts triggered by the threat to his mate and pack. Options? She asked. Fight or flee, Thomas said bluntly. We could evacuate the territory, relocate to lands where hunters are less likely to follow, and abandon everything we've built here, the alliances with local humans, the integration projects, the safe havens we've established. Aria shook her head. That's exactly what they want to drive us back into hiding, to undo the progress we've made. Then we fight, Elena said. But 8 professional hunters against a pack of 23, with younglings and elders to protect. The odds aren't favorable unless we even them, Aria said, an idea beginning to form. Elena, how long before they reach the main settlement? At their current pace? 6 hours? Maybe 8. Time enough. Aria moved to the cottage's communication mirror, one of the magical devices Moira had provided to maintain contact with the wider supernatural community. Thomas, I need you to coordinate the pack's defenses. Elena, send word to our human allies in the valley. They need to know what's coming. What are you planning? Thomas asked, suspicion replacing concern in his voice. I'm going to prove that cooperation is stronger than domination. The communication mirror shimmered to life, showing Moira's ageless face surrounded by the silver leaves of her forest realm. Aria, the Fey woman said without preamble, I felt the disturbance in the magical currents. Hunters, yes, 8 professionals, possibly more. They're targeting the pack specifically. Aria kept her voice steady, despite the fear clawing at her chest. I need to know what we're really facing. Give me a moment. Moira's image grew distant as she consulted sources of information beyond human understanding. When she returned, her expression was grim. The Blackwood Institute, an organization that's been hunting supernatural beings for 3 centuries. They specialize in elimination of what they term evolutionary anomalies, such as dire wolves bonded to alphas. Exactly. To them, you represent the potential for supernatural beings to become too powerful, too integrated with human society. They see you as a threat to the natural order that includes vampires hiding in castles and werewolves living as outcasts. The natural order that keeps supernatural beings weak and divided. Moira's ancient eyes held sympathy and steel in equal measure. They've been instrumental in preventing alliances like yours for generations. Aria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. How do we fight them? You don't fight them, Moira replied. You outthink them. The Blackwood Institute operates on the assumption that supernatural beings are primitive, driven by instinct rather than intelligence. They use that assumption to predict behavior and set traps accordingly. But If we don't behave as they expect, then their carefully laid plans become liabilities rather than assets. Moira smiled, and it was a predator's expression. I'll provide what support I can, but the real work must be done by you and your allies. The mirror connection ended, leaving Aria alone with her thoughts and the growing weight of responsibility. Through the pack bond, she could feel Damon's approach, his fierce protectiveness mixed with absolute faith in her abilities. He entered the cottage like a force of nature, his alpha presence filling the small space, even in human form. Tell me, he said simply. Aria outlined what she'd learned about the Blackwood Institute, watching as understanding and determination flowed across his features. Professional hunters with 3 centuries of experience, he said when she finished. They'll know every traditional werewolf tactic, every expected response. Then we give them something unexpected. What do you have in mind? Before Aria could answer, a new voice spoke from the cottage doorway. Perhaps I can be of assistance. They turned to see Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the human veterinarian who had been working with the pack for the past month to establish medical protocols for both human and werewolf physiology. She was a practical woman in her 40s, with graying hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Dr. Mitchell, Damon said, clearly surprised. How did you? Elena sent word about the hunters. I came as quickly as I could. Sarah stepped into the cottage, her medical bag in one hand and something that looked like a military radio in the other. I also took the liberty of contacting some friends who might be able to help. Friends? The International Supernatural Accords Committee. They've been monitoring the Blackwood Institute for years, building a case for formal intervention. Sarah's smile was grim. They've been waiting for an opportunity to act against hunters who've been operating outside any legal framework. Aria felt hope stirring in her chest. What kind of intervention? The kind that involves federal authorities, international law enforcement, and enough legal pressure to shut down the institute permanently. Sarah set the radio on the table. That they need evidence of current illegal activity, and they need it documented by credible witnesses. You want us to let the hunters attack? I want us to let the hunters incriminate themselves while we make sure everyone survives the encounter. Through the pack bond, Aria felt Damon's mixture of admiration and concern. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity, but it required them to put the entire pack at risk to gather evidence. How do we do it? She asked. Very carefully, Sarah replied, and with a lot more help than they're expecting. By evening, the cottage had become a command center, unlike anything the mountains had ever seen. Representatives from 3 different species worked side by side, coordinating a defense that relied more on intelligence than force. Dr. Mitchell had been busy with her radio, calling in favors from contacts across the supernatural community. The International Supernatural Accords Committee had agents en route, but they wouldn't arrive until the next day. Local human authorities had been quietly alerted to unusual military activity in the area, while Forest Service rangers were establishing perimeters that would funnel the hunters into carefully chosen locations. The beauty of it, explained Marcus Chen, a human liaison from the Accords Committee, who had arrived by helicopter an hour earlier, is that the Blackwood Institute has always operated in legal gray areas. They claim to be a private security firm dealing with exotic animal threats, but their methods would horrify any legitimate authority. What methods? Elena asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer wouldn't be pleasant. Torture for information gathering, experimentation on captured supernatural beings, assassination of human allies who become inconvenient. Marcus's voice was matter of fact, but Aria could see the disgust in his eyes. They've managed to avoid prosecution for decades by being very careful about witnesses and evidence. Until now, Thomas added grimly. The elder had thrown his full support behind the plan once he understood the scope of what they were facing. Luna Aramea's right. This isn't about pack survival anymore. It's about whether supernatural beings have the right to exist openly. The hunters have established a base camp 2 miles north of here, reported Jake Winters, one of the younger pack members, who had been shadowing the hunters in wolf form. 8 humans with enough silver ammunition to kill every werewolf in 3 territories. They're planning to hit the settlement at dawn. Let them come, Aria said, studying the tactical map spread across her kitchen table, but not where they expect to find us. The plan was complex, requiring precise timing and coordination between species that had historically viewed each other with suspicion. The pack would evacuate their primary settlement, leaving behind carefully staged signs of a larger population. The hunters would find an apparently defenseless target, but their attack would be recorded by hidden cameras and supernatural witnesses, whose testimony would hold up in any court. What about casualties? Damon asked, voicing the concern they all shared. If the hunters realize they're being monitored, they might escalate to levels we can't contain. That's where I come in, said a new voice from the cottage's back door. Everyone spun toward the sound, weapons ready, before recognizing Moira. The fair woman had materialized from shadow as if she'd always been there, her ancient power making the air itself seem to hum with possibility. "My lady," Marcus said, offering a respectful bow. "I didn't expect to see you here in person." "Desperate times," Moira replied with a slight smile. "Besides, I have a personal interest in seeing the Blackwood Institute neutralized. They've been interfering with fair court business for far too long." "What kind of interference?" Aria asked. "The kind that involve kidnapping our people for experimentation, disrupting ancient treaties, and attempting to weaponize fair magic for their own purposes." Moira's expression grew cold. "They believe that supernatural beings are resources to be exploited, rather than people with rights and dignity. Can you protect our people during the confrontation?" "I can do better than that. I can ensure that every word spoken, every action taken, is recorded not just by human technology, but by magic that no court in any realm would question." Moira gestured, and the air shimmered with barely visible threads of silver light. "When this is over, the Blackwood Institute will face justice in both human and supernatural courts." Through the pack bond, Aria felt Damon's growing confidence in their plan. It was risky, requiring them to trust in allies they barely knew, while putting their entire pack in danger. But it was also their best chance to end the threat permanently, rather than simply surviving this single attack. "Positions, everyone," she said, as the first hints of dawn touched the mountain peaks. "Time to show the world what cooperation can accomplish." The attack came exactly as predicted. 8 heavily armed hunters moved through the forest with military precision, their silver-loaded weapons gleaming in the early morning light. They had studied werewolf behavior for decades, knew exactly how packs responded to threats, understood the territorial instincts that would drive the Ironwood wolves to defend their settlement. What they didn't expect was to find the settlement apparently empty, except for a few scattered wolves, who seemed unaware of their approach. "Too easy," muttered the team leader, a scarred man in his 50s, whose tactical gear bore the subtle insignia of the Blackwood Institute. "Where is everyone?" "Maybe they got spooked," suggested his lieutenant, a younger woman, whose eyes held the kind of cold calculation that came from viewing supernatural beings as nothing more than dangerous animals. "Pack could have scattered when they sensed us coming." "Negative. Werewolves don't abandon territory without a fight, especially not when they have young and elderly to protect." The leader gestured for his team to spread out, maintaining communication through earpieces that would have impressed most military units. "This feels like a setup." Hidden in the trees above, Aria watched the hunters approach while monitoring the positions of her allies through the pack bond. Damon and Elena were positioned to the north, ready to intercept any hunters who tried to retreat. Thomas and 3 younger pack members covered the eastern approach, while Dr. Mitchell and Marcus Chen documented everything from concealed positions, equipped with cameras that could function in supernatural environments. Most importantly, Moira's presence ensured that every word, every action, was being recorded by magic that would create unimpeachable evidence of the hunter's intentions and methods. "Target quiet," came the voice of one hunter over their communication system. "Lone wolf, adult female, appears to be guarding something." Aria felt her breath catch as she realized they were talking about Maria Santos, one of the pack's nursing mothers, who had volunteered to play the role of vulnerable bait. It had seemed reasonable in planning, but watching armed humans target someone she was bound to protect triggered every protective instinct in her dire wolf nature. "Do not engage," the team leader ordered. "We need intelligence first. Adams, Chen, circle around and see if you can determine what she's protecting." "Copy that." Two hunters began moving through the underbrush with professional stealth, their weapons trained on Maria, who was doing an excellent job of appearing frightened and defensive while actually monitoring their approach through enhanced werewolf senses. "This is it," Aria whispered into her own communication device. "They're about to commit aggravated assault with intent to harm a supernatural being. All recording devices active." Confirmed came Marcus's voice. "Federal surveillance is live. Supernatural witnessing protocols are engaged, and Fey Court documentation is recording." "Weapons hot," added Dr. Mitchell grimly. "Medical support standing by." Through the pack bond, Aria felt Damon's tension as he prepared to intervene if the situation escalated beyond their ability to control. They had one chance to do this right, to gather enough evidence to destroy the Blackwood Institute while protecting everyone involved. "Movement," one of the hunters reported. "Multiple contacts approaching from the north. Looks like the rest of the pack." "Finally," the team leader said, with satisfaction. "Positions, everyone. Remember, we need at least 2 alive for questioning, but the rest are expendable." That was exactly the kind of statement they needed recorded. Aria smiled grimly as she felt Moira's magic capture and preserve every word with supernatural fidelity. "Execute," the leader commanded. The hunters opened fire with silver bullets and tranquilizer darts, their attack coordinated and professional. But instead of finding vulnerable werewolves, they discovered that their targets were prepared, protected, and fighting back with tactical awareness that matched their own. Elena and Damon struck from the north, with werewolf speed and intelligence, disarming 2 hunters before they could fire a second shot. Thomas's group moved in from the east, using their wolf forms to confuse and disorient attackers who'd expected predictable pack behavior. Most importantly, the hunters found themselves facing not just werewolves, but a coordinated defense that included human allies, fey magic, and supernatural beings who had learned to fight as a team rather than a collection of individuals. "What the hell?" the team leader shouted as his carefully planned assault turned into a chaotic retreat. "These aren't supposed to be organized." "Sir, we have federal agents moving in from the west," one of his men reported. "Multiple vehicles, full tactical gear, and something else," added another hunter, his voice tight with fear. "Something that doesn't show up on any of our sensors." That would be Moira, Aria realized, as the Fey woman materialized in the center of the clearing, like vengeance given form. Her ancient power made the air itself crackle with energy that spoke to every primitive instinct the hunters possessed. "Gentlemen," Moira said, her voice carrying harmonics that made everyone present stop and listen. "You are under arrest by authority of the International Supernatural Accords Committee for crimes against supernatural persons, violation of international law, and conspiracy to commit genocide." "You have no authority here," the team leader snarled, though his hands shook as he raised his weapon toward the Fey woman. "On the contrary," Moira replied, with a smile that would have terrified apex predators, "I have been granted full prosecutorial authority by courts in 7 different realms. Your organization's crimes span multiple worlds, Mr. Davidson." The fact that she knew his name seemed to break whatever resolve the hunter had left. His weapon clattered to the ground as federal agents emerged from the tree line, their own weapons trained on the hunters with professional precision. "James Davidson," called Agent Sarah Rodriguez of the FBI's Supernatural Crimes Division, "you and your team are under arrest for violation of the Supernatural Persons Protection Act, conspiracy to commit murder, and about 30 other federal charges." "This is impossible," Davidson said, but his voice held the hollow tone of someone whose world had just collapsed around them. "We had intelligence, planning, superior firepower. You had arrogance," Aria said, stepping out of concealment in her human form. You assumed that supernatural beings were too primitive to outthink you, too divided to work together, too powerless to have legal recourse. She gestured toward the recording equipment that was being revealed all around the clearing. You were wrong on every count. 6 months later, the Blackwood Institute had been dismantled completely, its leadership facing trial in both human and supernatural courts. The evidence gathered during the Dawn raid had exposed decades of illegal activity, leading to arrests across multiple countries and the liberation of supernatural beings who had been held in secret facilities. More importantly, the successful cooperation between human authorities and supernatural communities had led to formal recognition of supernatural rights in international law. The Accords Committee had been expanded into a permanent organization with enforcement powers, while local communities across the world began establishing their own integration programs. Aria stood in the expanded cottage that now served as headquarters for the Ironwood Pack's integration initiative, watching as human and werewolf children played together in the garden outside. Her pregnancy was showing now, her body changing to accommodate cubs that would be born into a world where their dual nature was a gift rather than a burden. Any regrets? Damon asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his hands on her growing belly. About which part? She replied with a smile. Starting a war with centuries-old hunter organizations, revolutionizing supernatural law, creating the first integrated pack in modern history? About giving up the quiet life of a simple shepherd? Aria leaned back against his chest, feeling through their bond his deep contentment with the life they had built together. I spent 24 years watching the world from the sidelines, Damon. Now I'm helping to reshape it. And the cubs will grow up knowing they're part of something larger than themselves, she said, her hands covering his on her stomach. They'll learn to build bridges instead of walls, to see cooperation as strength rather than weakness. The old packs, renewed and evolved. Exactly. Through the cottage windows, she could see Dr. Mitchell working with a mixed group of human and werewolf researchers, developing new medical protocols that would benefit both species. Marcus Chen was coordinating with Moira on expansion of the integration program to other supernatural communities. Even Thomas had embraced his role as an elder advisor, his initial skepticism transformed into fierce pride in what their pack had accomplished. I love you, Damon said quietly, the words carrying the weight of absolute truth. I love you too, Aria replied, and through their bond, she felt the echo of forever, not the desperate forever of fairy tales, but the chosen forever of partners who had found their perfect match and were using that strength to make the world better for everyone. In the distance, a wolf howled, not in mourning or challenge, but in pure joy at being alive in a world where such love was possible, where cooperation had proven stronger than conflict, where the future belonged to those brave enough to choose understanding over fear. Aria howled back, her dire wolf voice, joining the song that celebrated not just their personal happiness, but the dawn of a new age, where supernatural beings and humans could build something beautiful together. The old packs had been more than renewed. They had been transformed into something that would endure for generations to come. What did you think of Aria's transformation from shepherd girl to pack Luna? Drop your thoughts below. If you loved this werewolf romance, hit that like button and subscribe for more supernatural love stories every week. Until next time, may your own pack find you.